I sat by the floor-to-ceiling window in my high-rise apartment, the city lights stretching endlessly below. My silk blouse felt impossibly smooth against my skin, but the tension in my chest made it feel like iron. My phone buzzed on the glass table, another message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. It was my mother. "Dinner tonight. Your father wants to see you." I stared at the text, a strange cocktail of emotions twisting inside me: irritation, a flicker of old hurt, and the tiniest spark of curiosity. My life had been quiet, controlled, successful. Nobody knew the hours I spent building my little empire from scratch. Nobody knew how much it had cost me to survive in a world that didn't always welcome a young woman daring to carve her own path. And yet, here was a summons that threatened to stir the past. I traced my fingers over the rim of my coffee mug, thinking of the night I walked out of the family dining room, my father shouting words that had scarred me more than I ever admitted. "You're the most selfish daughter I've ever known." I closed my eyes for a moment. I could still feel the sting of those words, the ache of humiliation. But I was no longer that girl. I straightened my back, smoothed my hair, and picked up my phone. Tonight, I would go, not as the girl they remembered, but as the woman they had underestimated. It was 5 years ago, and I was barely 22, sitting at the long oak dining table of our family home. The chandelier above flickered as if echoing the tension in the room. My father's face was red, his voice booming across the room, and my mother sat frozen, hands clutched tightly in her lap. "You're the most selfish daughter I've ever known," he shouted again, and I felt something inside me snap. I had come home for a weekend visit, hoping for a simple family dinner, a chance to share a small success from my fledgling career. But apparently, sharing was a sin. Every achievement I mentioned was met with criticism or dismissal, every attempt to speak up twisted into proof of my selfishness. My stepmother's eyes narrowed, the faint curl of a smirk telling me she had whispered poison into his ear again. The lump in my throat made it hard to breathe. My hands shook as I held my fork, the silver cold against my palms. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows of the room. I wanted to scream that I had worked nights, sacrificed friends, and poured everything I had into building a future that wasn't just dependent on their approval. But the words stuck in my throat. Then I felt the familiar weight of my grandmother's locket in my pocket, the one she had pressed into my hand the summer I graduated high school. "Always remember," she'd said, her voice soft but firm, "your worth is not measured by how they see you, Madison. It's measured by how fiercely you protect your dreams." That night I walked out. Not just out of the dining room, but out of the home that had become a cage. I didn't know exactly what lay ahead, only that I could no longer stay in a place where love came wrapped in judgment. I carried the locket with me, a small talisman of courage and a whisper of the independence I was about to claim. I didn't look back. I rented a tiny studio apartment in the heart of the city, the kind where the heating barely worked and the faucet dripped constantly. But to me, it was freedom. Freedom to make mistakes, to stay up all night learning, and to chase dreams that had been dismissed at the family dining table. My first weeks were brutal. I took every odd job I could find: freelance writing, administrative work, even tutoring in the evenings. Exhaustion became my closest companion. There were nights I sat cross-legged on the floor, textbooks sprawled around me, trying to teach myself skills that others seemed to master effortlessly. I questioned myself constantly. Am I good enough? Can I really make this work? Then came Mrs. Evelyn Harper, a seasoned marketing executive I met at a networking event. She saw potential in me that I hadn't yet dared to see myself. She taught me strategy, discipline, and how to navigate a world that often underestimated women. "Madison," she said one evening, handing me a notebook filled with her scribbled advice, "you're building more than a career. You're building a life that nobody can take from you." I threw myself into work with a ferocity that surprised even me. My first small client paid just enough to cover rent, but it felt like victory. The next project brought a bigger paycheck, and soon I was closing deals I once thought impossible. Every success, no matter how modest, was a quiet rebellion against the girl my father accused of selfishness. I kept most of it secret. Calls home were brief, carefully curated snapshots that made it seem like I was still struggling, still dependent. My family remained blind to the late nights, the cold apartments, the relentless pursuit of independence that had become my life. I smiled politely, nodded at their advice, and quietly built an empire that existed in the shadows of their assumptions. And all the while, the locket my grandmother had given me rested against my heart, a constant reminder that my worth wasn't measured by their words, but by the courage I carried every day. The invitation to my office was casual, almost careless. "Come by, Madison. We'd love to see you." My father, my mother, and my stepmother had no idea what awaited them. I led them through the glass doors of my downtown office, a sleek space filled with sunlight, modern art, and personal touches that reflected years of dedication. The walls were adorned with framed achievements, contracts I had signed, awards I had earned, and photographs of projects I had poured my heart into. My assistant, discreet and professional, greeted them politely before leaving us alone. I let them take it in. I didn't speak immediately. I watched the confusion flicker across my father's face, the disbelief in my stepmother's eyes, and the cautious awe on my mother's. They had expected a timid, struggling girl, someone still tethered to their opinions. Instead, they saw a woman who had quietly, resolutely, carved her own path. "Madison," my father finally started, voice hesitant. I didn't realize." I smiled softly, allowing a pause to stretch. "Yes, you didn't," I said. "I didn't realize either how blind you'd been to my life outside this house. But I've built it. Every late night, every risk, every rejection, it all led here." I gestured around the office. "This is my company. I own it. These contracts, my clients, my decisions. My net worth, which I've quietly grown over the past 5 years, is beyond what you could have imagined. And I've done it without anyone's approval or interference." My stepmother's mouth opened, then closed. My father's shoulders slumped. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide. The words I had longed to say finally found their weight in the room. "I didn't come here for revenge," I continued. "I didn't build this life to prove you wrong, though, as you can see, it did that too. I built it for me, for the girl you told was selfish, the girl you tried to silence, the girl you underestimated." Their silence was deafening. I let it linger, letting them absorb not just my words, but the reality that I had transformed every ounce of their criticism into something unstoppable. And in that pause, I saw it: shock, shame, disbelief, and a tinge of pride buried somewhere deep. I finally smiled and said, almost gently, "I'm not the girl you shouted at. I'm the woman who walked out. And I walked in here to show you exactly how far that choice carried me." The room was thick with tension, the kind that doesn't need words to hang in the air. I could feel the balance of power shift subtly toward me, and for the first time in years, it felt effortless. "I've given you a glimpse of what I've built," I said, letting my voice remain calm but firm. "And now, it's your choice how you proceed. But if you want any part of my life, my time, my presence, my support, there are conditions." My father's eyes widened. My stepmother's lips pressed into a thin line. My mother shifted nervously, uncertain whether she would object or comply. I let them stew for a moment before continuing. "First," I said, holding up the locket I always wore, "honesty. No more lies, no more pretending everything's perfect when it isn't. We start by acknowledging our truths. Second, respect. For me, for ourselves, for each other. The way you try to tear me down at that dinner table will not be tolerated again. You will speak to me as the woman I am, not the girl you once judged. Third, action. If you want my help, it will come with effort on your part. Pursue your dreams. Address your shortcomings. Leave behind the toxic habits that suffocated our family for years." I paused, letting the weight of each condition settle. "These are not punishments," I added softly, almost gently. "They're opportunities, chances to rebuild relationships on healthier ground. I care about you, but I will not bend to patterns that hurt me. I will not be silent anymore. That chapter is closed. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. My stepmother's face fell, a mixture of guilt and recognition dawning. Even my mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears, finally understanding the magnitude of what had been done to me and what I had done for myself. I've spent years building my independence in silence, I concluded. Now, if you choose to step into this new dynamic, it will be with accountability, growth, and respect. No exceptions. No shortcuts. But know this, if you fail to honor these conditions, I will continue to protect my life, my work, and my peace. Without hesitation. The room was quiet. The shift was complete. For the first time, I felt the full weight of power and clarity, tempered by compassion, resting firmly in my hands. Weeks passed, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the family began to shift. My father attended therapy sessions, confronting his old patterns. My stepmother began volunteering, learning humility through service. Even my mother rediscovered her own ambitions, enrolling in courses she had long put aside. I watched from a distance, sometimes offering guidance, other times simply allowing space for growth. I sat in my office one evening, the city lights painting the walls in gold and silver hues, and traced my fingers over the locket my grandmother had given me. It had journeyed from my pocket during my darkest nights to resting now against my heart. Reminder that every painful word, every tear, every step away from home had been worth it. I thought about that dinner, the shouting, the humiliation. And I realized something. It hadn't broken me, it had built me. Every accusation of selfishness had been a seed for strength, resilience, and determination. I had turned their doubt into fuel, their criticism into motivation. And now, as I watched my family begin to grow in their own ways, I felt a quiet satisfaction, a grace that came from knowing I had risen without losing myself. I was still the girl who walked out, yes, but now I was also the woman who returned on her own terms. I smiled, letting the weight of that truth settle. The locket warmed against my chest, and I whispered to myself, almost as a promise, I am my own daughter, my own woman, and my own story, and no one can take that from me.